We're live. Russia has conducted one of its major and biggest strikes on Ukraine in recent times. This was as a result of the Ukrainian attack on Luhan, where a number of college students were unfortunately basically hit, and they unfortunately passed. Since then, we were expecting a major Russian response, and yesterday we got that. 2 Oreshniks were used, a huge number of ballistic missiles were used, and a large number of drones were used as well. And you can see Kiev has been hit hard. Kharkov has been hit hard as well. We've got Levins coming on, who is a journalist and a social media influencer, and he's been covering Russia and Ukraine for quite a while. So let's get him on. Ethan, thanks for joining us. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
I'm doing great. If you can let the audience know, because a lot of things happened last night. I did an interview with someone, Ethan as well, a different Ethan, and he gave us an update while it was happening. But since then, a lot more has happened. So if you can give everyone an update on what happened last night and what the attack from Ukraine was that caused this response.
Yes, so a few nights ago, the Ukrainians launched around 10 drones. It wasn't a double tap or a triple tap. Zelensky launched 10 attack drones towards a college dormitory in Lugansk. These are kids that were aged 14 through 18. As of now, 10 of these kids, I don't know how many of them were 18, but these are school children. They're in college, they're in high school. It was a group of them. Have been killed. There's still a numerous amount that is in critical condition. The number could rise. Let's hope it doesn't. But the Ukrainians have been getting a lot more eager and a lot more aggressive on striking civilian targets. We saw it the other week when they launched drones at Moscow, and they had this just weird terrorist attack, is what you could call it, on Lugansk the other day. So Putin and the Russians said that they were building a response, and last night was likely their response. And you have a lot of people, including me, kind of questioning, where's this been at for 4 years? You could have drove the Ukrainians to the negotiating table. But what we saw last night from a military standpoint is 2 Oreshnik hypersonic missiles. These are arguably the strongest non-nuclear missiles on the planet. They go into outer space, they come down. NATO air defenses, any air defenses on the planet have no chance at touching these. They disperse into a cluster warhead type of munition. One of these was launched near Kiev. I believe another was in Donetsk or either northern Kiev. No one really knows because, yet again, they weren't really detected. We didn't have an exact radar location on these. We just know that there were 2 launches, 2 strikes somewhere across Ukraine. There were in total around 600 Jarin 2 drones, which is the Russian version of the Iranian Shahed. There were multiple attack locations, majority on Kiev, with the drones. Some were hit on Kharkiv as well. There were cruise missiles and Iskander ballistic missiles launched. Those are land-based, vehicle-based launched missiles. I believe 20 Iskanders, and those get launched pretty much every other night. They're Russia's favorite missile to use. And some Kinzhal cruise missiles that were also vehicle land-based. Those were launched at the capital as well. And very interestingly, for the first time since March, the Russian Navy decided to launch cruise missiles out of the Black Sea. They flew all the way across Ukraine, over Dnipro, over other major cities, not shot down once. They were detected, but they weren't shot down, and those struck last night. I think the death toll is at 2, which is, as always, it's a tragedy anytime civilians die, but with over 600 drones, 90 missiles, including 2 of the strongest on the planet, I would say that could have been a lot worse.
What were the targets in terms of from the Russian perspective?
Yes, so there was some frontline targets hit near Donetsk, some frontline targets hit in Kharkiv. The Oreshnik, the one that we know, the one confirmed shot, was on an Air Force base that is used a lot to repair planes, to fix drones. Near Kiev, the Oreshnik wasn't dropped on the city center itself. Actually, very few missiles and drones were striking the city center itself, but around the surrounding areas. The Oreshnik struck the Air Force Base, direct hits all over. It's pepper sprayed with the cluster munitions on the tarmac and other facilities to rebuild and repair Ukrainian jets. And the drones and cruise missiles were striking a lot of government decision-making centers in Kiev. But yet again, it was essentially 1 missile per building, so nothing was fully destroyed, fully just annihilated. There was a lot of fires, a lot of munition storage warehouses also in the surrounding center. There wasn't a lot of strikes, maybe just a handful from drones on the exact city center of Kiev, where you would have the biggest civilian population. All the fires that were cooking as of this morning and as of now, essentially hours, 12, 13 hours, 24 hours almost since it happened. A lot of these were on the outskirts of the city where a lot of ammunition depots were struck. But from a civilian standpoint, as of what I know right now, we didn't, which is great. We didn't see any schools, any hospitals, or anything like that hit. A few apartment buildings, but yet again, that happens on every side. I mean, heck, that happens in every war. Whenever drones are fired, they get very wacky. You know, they get jammed and kind of fire off everywhere. But a lot of aerial targets were struck on the Ukrainian side, a few government buildings, and that seemed to be the targets.
Okay, fair enough. And from the Ukrainian perspective, how successful were their interceptors or the defense capabilities or the anti-drone capabilities?
Yes, so I was looking at a Ukrainian Telegram channel. The Ukrainian official government said that around 90% of the drones and 50 out of 90 missiles were shot down, which is just unrealistic. Some were shot down. Of course, some were shot down. But that's an unrealistic number and honestly a slap in the face to the Ukrainians who had to deal with this overnight. There was a Ukrainian Telegram channel, I read it this morning, and it said that it was a disaster, that it was a complete failure, and that if they're not able to replenish the Patriot air batteries or any of these drone defense systems, because, you know, the Americans moved everything to the Middle East since January, and has left Ukraine very vulnerable, and because of that, we saw probably around a 50% hit rate from the drones, which is astronomically high, given that we're 4 years into this war and the Ukrainians can't shoot down these drones at this point. But the missiles, all of the Oreshniks hit. I believe most of the cruise missiles hit. The Iskander ballistic missiles, yet again, those have been firing every other day. The Ukrainians have gotten better at detecting those and trying to shoot those late stage. Probably the Iskanders had around a 70% hit rate, which is still astronomically high. Impact rate hitting the ground. I know that some Ukrainian F-16s are American, but Ukrainian F-16s, Ukrainian Mirages, which are the French jets that they were gifted, they were shooting down the drones. And once you see fighter jets having to be scrambled to shoot down the drones, you start to realize that they're running, if not have already ran out of, the drone interceptors. Because if you fire 600 drones, it's just damning to try to, pardon my French, to try to even think about launching interceptor missiles at all of those drones. Just to compare, the Iranians would fire maybe 1 or 2 missiles every few hours at Israel during the height of the war, and the Russians fired 90 within a few hours. I mean, it was a complete oversaturation of air defenses and radars, and honestly, anything past 50 drones and past about 10 missiles, you're just not going to have a chance on either side. We even see the Russians having some problems with it. It's just become so oversaturated that you're just really screwed.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And in terms of, we spoke a lot about how much defense interceptors US is running out of, especially in the Middle East, but generally speaking, what's the Ukrainian situation? Because they've been using quite a lot as well, and they'll be dropping down. Because I know they were already struggling with artillery. And what's the situation in terms of the defense interceptors?
Yeah, well, the air defenses in Ukraine at this point have all been essentially moved to Kiev. They've been withdrawn from Dnipro. They've been withdrawn from Kharkiv mainly. Kharkiv has a few left. Lviv has none, which is essentially the NATO command center over by Poland and Western Ukraine. But everything's been shifted towards Kiev. That's pretty much all they can protect right now. And the Russians got a lot through, which is even more impressive. But yes, a lot of the Patriot battery systems, there's a few of them left in the capital. Yet again, they're trying to essentially move these every night to prevent the Russians from finding them and destroying them. But interceptors in total are running very low, because as you know, no other country essentially in Europe creates these. It's an American system. Israel doesn't even make these interceptors. The South Korea, Japan, the Americans are having to pull them from Asia right now to bring them to the Middle East. So there's really no spares right now to send any to Ukraine. So Ukraine's essentially running on a stockpile that they have left over, and yet again, they're just kind of having to decide what they want to try to shoot down. If they see an Iskander coming towards a presidential office or towards the Rada, which is the parliament building, then they'll put one in the air, and it's an American Patriot battery. They have a good intercepting rate. It's not a bad air defense system, but the problem for Ukraine is that when you have 600 drones and 90 missiles all converging at the capital, I mean, you realistically only have a maximum of 10 interceptor missiles to put in the skies. And last night, I saw a few of them go up, maybe 5. truthfully, I didn't see any missiles. That's why I'm very confused why the Ukrainian military is trying to claim that they shot a missile down. They shot drones down. They did that with fighter jets. But the air defense system shortage in Ukraine right now is just going to get worse and worse. And as long as Russia keeps throwing missiles and drones towards the capital where these Patriot systems are, and as long as the Middle East tensions remain high, Ukraine is going to fall into an increasingly vulnerable state going into this summer when the Russians are going to inevitably pick up the offensive on the ground.
That makes sense. Now, what about Ukraine's anti-drone capability? I know Zelensky has been touting this and trying to sell it in the Middle East.
I mean, they're very good. Everybody at this point has a pretty solid drone defense capability, but Ukraine's is very well. And, I'm not a big Ukraine fan. I hate Zelensky, but the truth is that Ukraine has gotten significantly better at shooting down and detecting Shahed drones, Jaren drones, jet-powered or propeller-based. They're doing pretty good at it. But yet again, it's the oversaturation. Russia is a massive country. The production capability of Russia is outdoing NATO right now. So whatever Europe can produce right now to give to Ukraine, the Russians are outproducing that just of themselves. And they're still buying Shahed drones through the Caspian Sea from the Iranians. So Russia has a incredible amount of these cheap drones. I mean, they're like $100,000, but comparing that to the interceptor missiles, which themselves are hundreds of thousands of dollars, Ukraine is having to adapt with a lot of turret-based systems on the back of trucks, which, I mean, if it works, it works. Congrats. But the Russians are oversaturating a lot of the air defenses in Ukraine, whether the Ukrainians are, like I said, just putting turrets on trucks trying to shoot them down. It works, of course. But whenever 600 are launched, the most you could ever shoot down is maybe 500, and then you're still going to get 100 of these major explosions across the country at oil depots, munitions. And whenever the Russians want to fire 100 Shaheds at these areas, all it takes is one. All you need is one drone to strike an ammunition depot, an electrical center, or any of these oil or gasoline areas in Ukraine, and the whole area is going to explode and be cooked off. So the Ukrainians are very advanced, and this is something that they're domestically producing. Missiles, they're going to be reliant on the United States for till the end of time, like everyone else is. The Israelis are reliant, the Europeans, NATO is fully reliant on the Americans for missile defense. But drone defense, they can be domestically produced, and they're doing a pretty good job at that. But on the counter hand, the Russians can just produce more drones, and if they have to fire 100 more a night to continue to hit the same targets, they're going to be able to do that.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. Now, in terms of moving on, in terms of the conflict, one of the things that we saw was this, in terms of this acceleration that's occurring. Where do you think the conflict goes? And what I mean by that is I've had on, for example, Dmitry Polyansky, Andrei Martinov, and various others, and they all seem to suggest that they've just had enough. They've had enough with what's going on. They've had enough with the Europeans, and they seem to suggest that they're going to escalate. And there is rumblings going on from Russia that in the next few weeks, or maybe in the next few months, you could start seeing Russia start focusing in on Europe as a kinetic warfare. What's your thoughts?
It's possible. It's entirely possible. I felt like last year was when the Russians in 2025, late 2024, is when they really took the upper hand on the ground and kind of in the total aspect. You had Trump winning the election. You had a lot of right-wingers across Europe winning the elections. And they're very skeptical on giving Ukraine the aid that, they need to keep fighting. And it's straight up, if Ukraine doesn't receive aid, they're going to lose the entire country. They don't have any domestic capabilities for anything offensively, anything defensively besides drones. And yet again, that's not going to win the war. That just helps you prevent civilian deaths. So if the Europeans continue to shift away from Ukraine, as Trump has just fully shifted away, they're no longer giving arms for free, they're no longer really sharing intelligence, the Russians are seeing this, and they're understanding they have an advantage. From 2022 to 2024, it was kind of maddening to watch the absolute trench warfare stalemate that was occurring. But now it looks like Putin did have a long-term game plan, which just was to wait out Europe. Russia's a country that's been built on war for centuries. I mean, they got invaded multiple times in the past 100 years. They're willing and ready to fight for a war, and they have a massive production and output. They have a massive population. They can withstand this far more than Europe can. And if they have to throw some kinetic warfare shots, like you said. Do I think we're going to see missiles on Estonia or the Baltics or Poland or drone strikes on production facilities? I wouldn't think so, because that does run the risk of NATO getting directly involved, which would just be catastrophic. And nobody wants that. Putin doesn't want that. The Europeans and NATO definitely don't want anything like that to happen. But I think we could see some hybrid warfare through Belarus, through the Kaliningrad region, which is the small Russian enclave bordering Lithuania and Poland. We could see some drone jamming. We know that Ukraine is using and launching drones through the western half of Ukraine up towards Poland and the Baltic. So Ukraine is, as of about 6 months ago, has started to use NATO airspace, which is a massive escalation that NATO is allowing this to happen. Lithuania shot down a Ukrainian drone the other day, which is interesting. I thought that NATO should have maybe been a little more hardlined on it instead of just blaming Russia for a Ukrainian drone threatening NATO civilians. It's absurd. But Russia's going to have to do something. Do I know exactly what they're going to do? No. But could we see the Russians through Belarus begun to shoot down Ukrainian drones over NATO airspace? Could we see Russian fighter jets, which it is possible that Russian jets could get to the border of NATO near the Baltic areas north of Belarus, and they could pull the fighter jets extremely close to the border and fire an interceptor missile and shoot down these Ukrainian drones over NATO airspace? That's fully legal, by the way, because this drone is violating NATO airspace, and it's soon to violate Russian airspace. So if anything, the Russians will be doing them a favor. But I would say that this is the highest escalation we could get this year, would just be that Russia begins to shoot down Ukrainian drones over NATO airspace.
Okay. And from the specifics of the Russia-Ukraine conflict within Ukraine, where do you see that going? Because, again, this has been a long war. It's been 4 years. And yet there seems to be no end to sight.
Well, diplomacy is dead. Negotiations are not going to work. You have Zelensky, who is willing to quite literally fight to the last Ukrainian. There's only 25 million left. 10 million of them are pensioners. And that's, say, what, half are women. You've got about 5-6 million military-aged men. Quite literally, if Russia wants to fight this for another 10 years, Ukraine as a nation is going to cease to exist. And I don't want that. I don't want to see the Ukrainian people and the country completely wiped off the map. I don't think anybody wants that. If Putin wanted that to happen, we would have already seen stronger strikes on the capital level to the ground, such as what the Israelis do in Gaza. That's ethnic cleansing. Russia's conducting a war in an operation, specifically on the 4 regions in southeast Ukraine. And where we're at now is the Russians control around 90% of the 4 regions. They have total control of Lugansk, like we saw the other day. That's the area the Ukrainians struck the school children. I think it's just going to be settled on the ground. I know Russia's pushing from 2 other regions. Belarus has begun to mobilize and threaten up north near the Kiev region, but I doubt we'll see that. Belarus is a small country with only 10 million people, a small army. That's just simply to pull more Ukrainian troops up to that area just to guard the border, just cuz. And that's going to allow the Russians to push further into the Donetsk region, which is the second region they're looking to grab. That's the last one in the Donbass area. And then they can focus their efforts on Kherson, Zaporizhia, but there's no diplomatic way out unless Zelensky gives up the 4 regions, which Russia already controls about 80% of in total. That's the only way out. And Zelensky's fully signaling. He's signaled it multiple times. He's had a year to accept this, by the way. And he says it's not going to happen. So what's going to make his mind change now? And from the Russian perspective, you can't end the war. You can't. You can't go home and just leave everything there and you have hundreds of thousand casualties and just, it would be for nothing. And for Putin and for the Russian government, who relies on strength and power and just the Russian pride and nationalistic ideas, you can't have a war of 5 years to where you hold this land the whole time. The whole time you've held this land, you've captured on multiple entire regions, Crimea, Lugansk. You can't just walk away. And the Europeans believe that's going to happen. The Europeans and Zelensky are still believing that this ends today if Russia goes home. That's not realistic. And I don't care if you're pro-Ukraine, pro-Russia, or neutral. The idea that Putin is just going to withdraw the troops and just call it a day, it's just not realistic. What's realistic is that we can meet in the middle and we can have Ukraine retain its entire sovereignty. They can retain their government for all I care. If they want Zelensky forever, they can have it. They can have Zelensky. He can have his seat as president. They just have to give up about 20% each of the remaining 4 regions, and this can end today.
But that's the $1 million question. I don't think there's going to be a scenario where he's willing to do that. And I guess because we know they're not willing to do that in terms of Ukraine because of the backing they have from Europe and to a lesser extent the United States of America. And with Putin obviously sacrificing so much over these 4 years, he would have people turn on him if he decided to give away land that they'd taken by giving up number of Russian lives. I guess the question mark becomes how much more longer, if it was something that ends up ending in the battlefield, as per what you said, how much more longer would this take?
As long as Zelensky wants it to. That's the genuine question. You know, Russia has 140 million people. They have a industry that is outproducing NATO itself. They have a population that has been through war, ready for war. That's why there's been no problems in Russia. They haven't even had a full mobilization. They just had a exercise in Belarus with 65,000 troops just in a training exercise. They have the manpower. They have the production. They have the allies in China and North Korea that can give them any tech they need. Europe thought they could shut out Russia from the chip market, the tech, so they couldn't repair their planes. Well, they just get it from China now. China is the number one, producer of technology in the world at this point. So Russia is going to be able to survive this as long as it takes. Obviously, if we get to like 20 years of war, there would be a problem if Russia still hasn't won this. But just looking at Ukraine, dwindling of a population, 25 million total people left. You can say half are women. I know for a fact from the Tucker Carlson interview with the former Ukrainian press secretary, there's 10 million people in Ukraine that are elderly, that are receiving a pension. So we know that they cannot fight. That's 75 years older. So you're only looking at like 9 to 10 million military-aged male in Ukraine. How many of those want to fight? How many of those are children? How many of those are disabled? How many of those are going to flee the country before it happens? And if this continues to where every month we're seeing an escalation, every month we're seeing the battlefield shift even more, it's picking up in ways that we haven't seen since literally the first week of the war. We're seeing frontline changes every hour now. I mean, it's still minuscule in different areas, but it's kinetic. It's no longer a stalemate anywhere. We're seeing the Russians and the Ukrainians push either way, which just means the battle of attrition, basically who can last longer, that is speeding up, and that is a disaster for the Ukrainians, which is why I think they're resorting to these school strikes, the strikes on Moscow, the strikes on Petersburg. They're trying a lot of different strategies right now just to spook the Russian population. And as of last night saw, that's not something that's going to happen.
How big was the attack yesterday and today? How big was it? Because I'm seeing like a lot of Russian channels saying, look, we were waiting for this. Took a bit too long to make this type of attack. What's your thoughts?
I mean, it was a massive attack. And yet again, it's still just a fraction of their power. Russia has around 50 to 60 of these Oreshnik missiles. They can produce 4 a year if they have to. And they've only launched 4 this entire war. So they have maybe even a bigger stockpile than we think. They have tens of thousands of these drones. They have tens of thousands of any missile you can imagine. And they have it. And they've been holding it back. And they've been waiting. We haven't even seen the Russian Air Force fly over the capital. Could they? Would they get shot down? Possibly. But it's a risk that the Americans, the Israelis, are taking over Iran because that is a full-scale war, essentially. But what's happening in Ukraine is we've seen Putin withhold it a lot because he does have this Russian ideology that Kiev is a Russian city, that the regions are Novorossiya, which is the eastern half of Ukraine, east of the Dnieper River, which is 50% of the country, is a historical part of Russia. And if we're on YouTube, I don't know what I can say about that, but if you look up history, you do see that there is some interesting claims to back that up historically, that it is possible that that is a correct ideology. I'm not going to say if it is or it's not. But that's how Putin views this. So he doesn't want to destroy these cities. Why does he want to destroy these cities that the Soviets built, that the Russian Empire built, that had to be rebuilt after World War II? These are historical cities that Putin sees as part of Russia. So he doesn't want to destroy them. He doesn't want to. He sees the Ukrainian people and the Russian people, which they are, they're brothers. I mean, it's such close people through DNA, through languages. I mean, they're damn near the same. And Putin doesn't want to kill them. He doesn't want to destroy them. But yet again, we've had people dead, of course. Both sides. This is called war. People die. But, the Russian side has been waiting. To go back to the question, the Russian side has been waiting for something like this. I mean, we haven't seen a strike like this ever. We've seen 2 Oreshniks in the war, and one was on Lviv on an ammunition depot, and the other one was on Dnipro on an ammunition depot in 2023 and 2025. 2 were launched. The Russian Navy was firing cruise missiles for the first time, like I said, since March. Ballistic missiles are flying in the air, multiple types, not just on the front lines, not just on Kharkiv, which is by the border, but in Kiev, deep into Ukraine in the northern half, flying through Belarus, flying through all of the Chernigov, northeast regions, butchered that name. But this was a master strike. This was a major strike. A strike that signals to NATO that if Russia wanted to do this night in and night out, I mean, Kiev would be turned into Gaza within a month just from the sheer firepower of what Russia does have. I mean, they have some of the most advanced fighter jets on the planet that have not even really seen combat. The Su-57s, they haven't even really seen frontline combat. Do I know why? I don't know. That's been a big question in the Russian community for 4 or 5 years now. Why hasn't this escalated? Because you would think that escalation would benefit the Russians, but I don't have the answer to why Putin has decided this late to have one of these strikes. Maybe they could have spooked Zelensky into surrendering earlier, but now we've got Zelensky who is very emboldened to where you don't know if you can even spook him anymore. I mean, he's hiding in a Soviet type of bunker under Kiev, emerging from the daylight like a little rat, and he wants to look around at these areas and try to portray to the media. The EU wants to laugh and clown whenever the Russians get struck, but whenever the Russians strike back, apparently it's the end of the world, and it's a genocidal regime in Moscow. But yet again, to revert back to the question, I haven't talked about Ukraine-Russia in a very long time, and I really love it because this is a very interesting topic, and I really value you for having me on so we can actually tell people about this. Everyone is so worked up over the Middle East right now, they forget that we have a major war in Europe, and the Russians just launched 90 missiles in a span of 3 hours at a European capital. That is a big deal. 2 of them were hypersonics. That is a major deal. So to answer the question, this was a major escalation. This was a massive strike, and could it happen again tonight? Probably not, but could it happen again this week? We'll know very soon.
Oh yeah, and by the way, I appreciate you coming on. And yeah, we do about 4 to 5 interviews on Russia per week, and I think it's really important, as you said, because there is a war. There is a lot of lives being lost, and we're all against war. We want peace, and unfortunately, both of these wars are being, in my view, initiated by the West, and that's the United States of America, Europe, and Israel. But now, in terms of Ukrainian response, what do you think the Ukrainian response to this is going to be? Because we've seen recently, right? We've seen them attack oil refineries, LNG refineries. They've been trying to hit infrastructure significantly to harm the Russian population. How do you think Ukraine responds?
All they have is drones. They have the Zelensky Wonder Weapon, which is a play on Hitler's Wonder Weapons in 1945. But Zelensky has this Flamingo cruise missile, even though they're only producing about 5 of these a month. It was supposed to be 30. And they don't fire a lot of these cruise missiles because there's not a lot of frontline targets in Russia. When the war started, all of these oil depots, every factory, kind of like World War II, they moved them deep in the Ural Mountains or north of Moscow. So the Ukrainian cruise missiles and any missiles they have are going to get shot down. But what we're seeing is massive drone swarms on Russia and southern Russia near the oil depots, in the mountains in eastern Russia, and oil depots and factories, and of course at civilian populations in Moscow. That seems to be the trifecta that they're launching right now, and they'll spew out about 200, 300 drones, and some do hit their targets. It's the same way. Just like when Russia does it, you oversaturate the airspace, and you're not able to shoot down every single one. So you're getting a lot of these flashy hits on oil refineries in Russia, and it feels like the Russian economy could be reeling, that the Russian oil economy could be taking a strike. But remember what's also happening right now. The Strait of Hormuz is shut. So Russia is able to, because of the strikes, they're selling less oil, but they're selling the oil that they have at a crazy higher price. So for Ukraine, it looks good on social media. It looks fun. It looks happy whenever you see Russian oil refineries burning, I guess, for them. But Russia economically, which is where it really matters, they're not losing anything. If anything, actually, in March and in April, the Americans took off Russian sanctions just to try to relieve the global oil economy. So the Russians are now able to sell oil to a lot more people at an extremely higher price. And actually, this could be why the Ukrainians have begun striking these oil refineries, maybe because they're trying to offset it a little bit. But yet again, in either scenario of a Ukrainian response, you're either offsetting it to where the Russians are just kind of being brought back to normal oil trading levels, or the strikes essentially cause no harm whatsoever to the Russian economy, is where it really matters to continue the war effort, because Russia is going to sell them to China, to the Koreas, to India, to Pakistan. They're shipping containers through the Caspian Sea to Kazakhstan, to Europe. I mean, people act like Europe shut off gas. They've shut off nothing. If anything, they're importing more right now because of what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz. So the Russian oil economy, which is all that Ukraine can hit. Zelensky calls them long-range sanctions. They're not really having any impact whatsoever on Russia's economy. Matter of fact, the Russian ruble, their currency, is the strongest performing currency of 2025. And so far, this quarter of the year, the first few months, has been the strongest performing currency. So if Zelensky wants to continue, as he says, the long-range sanctions, of course they're going to have strikes. Of course it harms Russia. But it's not going to have the impact that the Russians are having on the Ukrainian logistics, the Ukrainian ammunition, and essentially Ukrainian morale in the country.
You know what's hilarious is what you just said now, that you had the Europeans who were basically very vitriol towards the Russians, and now they have to desperately go back to them in order to get energy. And the Indians who were getting discounted Russian oil, apparently they went to Israel, and based on some discussions, they kind of pulled back on that deal. And now they're having to go back to Russia and actually pay more. And if they'd stayed in the same place, they would have had discounted oil. So it's just, I agree with what you're saying in terms of how Russia has benefited significantly in terms of energy. They become probably one of the main or most important places to go in terms of energy. And I see a number of US allies who are actually negotiating with Russia in order to get energy, whether that's South Korea or Japan. People who would find it hugely problematic to even do any form of deal with Russia are now having those conversations. And also, you saw, isn't it, for the last 3 months, the US removed the sanctions on Russian oil, right?
100%. So now you have all of America's friends and allies that are buying it penalty free. And honestly, what's more interesting is, given that Russia sells their oil at a discount so that they can sell it to more people, when they're selling it to South Korea and Japan right now, who's to say whenever the Americans keep the sanctions on, that the South Koreans and the Japanese just give a middle finger to the U.S. and say, look, we've got to have oil anyway. We've got to have oil anyway. And just like the Chinese last week just ignored the American sanctions on the Iranians and bought some oil from Iran, who's to say that the American allies, because all it takes is one, whether it's South Korea or Japan, or it just takes one ally to just look at the Americans and say, look, we're going to straight up ignore your sanction because we have to have this oil. And then that could have a domino effect that the Russian oil economy and Russia's ability to sell oil is going to be more important than the Americans say in the world economy, which could occur this summer. Maybe it won't. Maybe it does. But that's also just more pressure on the West right now and having to rely more on Russia.
Yeah. Guys, make sure you're liking this video. We'll try and boost it to as many people as possible. Make sure you're liking it. Don't be lazy. Coming back to the question that we've got to you. So, okay, we've covered the Russia-Ukraine. I want to talk to you a small segment on Lebanon. Lebanon. We're seeing the Israelis attack Lebanon significantly and ferociously. What's the update on Lebanon? I saw a number of strikes by the resistance. We're on YouTube, by the way. We're by the resistance on Lebanon. At least, I think it was like 30 or 40 FPV strikes today. A large number of hits. If you can give everyone an overview of what you've seen happen in Lebanon over the last week or so.
Yeah, so the Israelis are continuing their invasion to the Yellow Line in southern Lebanon, which is essentially their buffer zone. By the way, they've already passed it twice in multiple areas. So this is just a BS diplomatic ruse by the Israelis for the Lebanese government, saying that's all we're going to do. We're just going to go to that line, dismantle resistance infrastructure, and we're going to go home. Yeah, they're not doing that. They're having a lot of bombings north of the Litani River, which the resistance isn't really settled in at all. But right now in Lebanon, we're seeing a lot of horrific strikes. I mean, horrific strikes on Nabatea, that's yet again north of the Litani River. Daily strikes on Tyre or Sor, if you're Arabic, that's how you say it. I'm learning. But some in Bekaa, which is the Bekaa Valley, which is northeast Lebanon. That's the mountains bordering Syria. Yeah. The Israelis are striking with impunity right now. They're striking a record number of paramedics. We've seen over 100 children killed, over 3,000 total civilians killed right now. And on the flip side, the resistance is doing all they can. Yet again, they are in a tough spot. I mean, to say the least right now. The Israelis have been bombing them since October 8th, 2023. So they're not at full capacity like they were in 2006 or like they were pre-September 2024 when the strike happened. So, but they're still holding a resistance, which is what they're supposed to do. They want to make it difficult. They want to be a porcupine to make it difficult for the Israelis. And there were 2 Israeli deaths today in Lebanon. That was reported about 30 minutes ago. We're going to get info on that. In total, we're, I believe, well over 40 IDF deaths in southern Lebanon. We don't know how many have occurred in northern Israel because we don't see the helicopter evacuations to really count the casualties. But as long as resistance can continue utilizing the FPV drones, which, as everybody that knows anything about the Ukraine situation right now, there's no way to stop it. There's no way to detect them. Radar can't pick it up. It's too small. There's no way of shooting it down. They're too quick. They're too easily to be launched. They're just handheld and launched. They're a few $100, so they're able to buy them in the dozens and the hundreds very soon. And I read that 30 of them were launched, like you said, today. And yet again, you just walk out of a tunnel, you hold it in your hand, you press a button, and then just fly it into something, whether it's an Iron Dome battery, they've hit multiple, whether it's a Merkava tank or a group of soldiers, which is how most of the Israelis are dying right now, the soldiers right now. And I just want to point out that if the resistance wanted to, they could fly these FPV drones into northern Israel and hit civilian targets pretty easily. They've decided not to. Just want to point that out there, that they're striking solely military targets right now, whether it is in the occupation zone in southern Lebanon or border areas in northern Israel. And on top of that, another thing that happened today is a reserve fighter pilot was, his jet allegedly was a civilian aircraft, so his aircraft crashed in northern Israel. We're not getting a lot of information on that, but I do want to say it's very interesting that a fighter pilot, he's a reserve fighter pilot, a platoon commander, was flying a jet, a civilian aircraft, near the Lebanese border, and it mysteriously crashed. Could that be the resistance shot it down, which the Israelis would deny that until their last day? Could we get an interesting video from the resistance or a statement sometime tonight about it? Would be interesting, but it's just a porcupine strategy out of Lebanon right now, and they're doing a pretty good job at it.
I had was it Laith Maroof on Friday. We're going to get him on again this week, and the question I asked him was, what is the level of Israeli casualties? He gave a number that was much higher than we're aware of. In his understanding, he believed that there were, I believe he said 2,000 Israeli casualties plus, and in addition to that, 400 Merkava tanks that had been taken out. What's your understanding of the level of loss when it comes from the Israeli side?
Yes, so we're going to take casualties as deaths and critically injured. Essentially, a casualty is a soldier that's not going to go fight again.
Okay, let me rephrase that.
Yes.
2,000 deaths, he said, not casualties. Casualties a lot higher, sorry.
2,000, no. 2,000's too high. 2,000's not going to happen. I mean, the Resistance had 30 FPV drones launched today, which was the highest we've seen. And just given that, and they had 2 deaths on the outcome of it, I mean, 2,000 is incredibly high. Israel might have 10,000 soldiers max in southern Lebanon right now. 2,000 would be an extreme number. They didn't even lose. Maybe they lost less than 100 in the 2006 war. Israel's a small country with a small population and a very, relatively a very small army size, extremely small, to be completely honest. They have a lot of reservists, which yet again suck at fighting. They don't want to fight. These are people that are forced into the army. They don't want to do this. They don't want to be in the IDF. Who does right now? So 2,000 deaths. From everything I know, from even people in Lebanon, people in Israel, that is very high. I could say that you could maybe make an argument of 2,000 deaths plus injuries. I would still say there's only around 500 casualties, which is deaths plus critically injured that's not going to come back and fight. Because, the resistance doesn't fight on a statistical level. They're not trying to inflict as much damage on possible. They're simply just trying to add a fear factor. They're trying to make it unbearable so that whenever you see maybe just 3 IDF deaths a day in Israel, which is 8 million, 7 million people, and only around 70,000 in the Israeli army, that adds up over time. That's more families that are very angry. That's more political parties that can pressure Netanyahu and pressure the Israeli army to withdraw out of that because, he's going to face a critical election coming in November. So, if 2,000 were to happen, man, they would have withdrawn at one. They would have withdrawn at 300. I just totally refute that. Maybe he knows something I don't, but that number, I just want everyone to comprehend that 2,000 IDF deaths, that's something that hasn't been seen maybe since the Yom Kippur War, if that. I mean, that would be it's just not real. I'll
Yeah,
just
I
be
don't think
honest with you.
it's.
It's
I
just not
personally don't
real.
think it's that high, but I do think it is a
Yeah.
lot larger than what you said as well. And the reason for this is you're right in saying it that if you look at Israel historically, they run away at the smallest site of any
Mhm.
type of loss. I think what's unique about this one is that the Israeli psyche is the same psyche I think we all kind of have to an extent, that this is the final war. This is their chance to take Lebanon, take Iran, take all these things, and therefore they're gonna have to take a bit more loss than they are accustomed to. So I'm hearing the number being decently high. At first time I heard 2,000, but I think the number is quite high. Because remember they had lied, they hide their actual real numbers about the number of people who died. What about Merkava tanks? How many Merkava tanks do you think have been taken out?
See, even if one is destroyed or even just damaged, you're essentially going to get the same outcome. Because if you have a damaged Merkava tank, it's not going to take a week to fix. I mean, this is going
Yeah.
to go in a factory on back order. If you even just damage one slightly to where it's out of combat duty, that Merkava tank is not going to be ready for war within. It might take up to 8 months. So whenever somebody says destroyed, or I say struck, because yet again, if you hit the tank, whether it's destroyed, blown up, or not, that tank is going to be out of commission for months. It's going to take millions of dollars to fix it. And I mean, man, given that we're seeing daily videos, multiple videos, I mean, drones now are just destroying these tanks. And yet again, we know from Ukraine and Russia, there's no way in the world that you're ever going to stop these little FPV drones. If NATO couldn't figure it out, if Russia and China essentially working together couldn't figure out how to stop them, I promise the Israelis won't. So I would say on a low number of Merkavas that have been hit, I would say you could say as low as 400, as high as 800, which is an extremely high number. Fully destroyed, you're probably looking around the 100 number. But yet again, each one of those is $5 million. I mean, we can easily say that they've lost nearly $1 billion in just tanks being hit, because if you say you fully lost a few of them up to around 100, because there's been around what, 400 announcements from the resistance on a direct hit on these tanks, and that's all you need is a direct hit, whether it's a drone strike, whether it is a rocket, or one of these anti-aircraft missiles. All you need is to hit the tank and just put it out of commission, out of combat readiness, and then they're going to have to take months to repair it. So I would say fully destroyed, you can look around 100, damaged out of service. And actually looking at it now, damaged out of service could be up to 250. So you're looking at 350-ish tanks that have been put out of commission.
That makes sense. That makes sense. And just last question on Lebanon. How do you think it's going? Like, how much more longer do you think the Israelis can continue doing what they're doing on the ground?
Well, they've held land. They've held land forever, but they've held meaningful land since 2024. The 2024 invasion, they held 5 outposts. They never left. But as of now, they're deep into the south. I mean, they're in past Kiev, past Ben Jabel, past Nakora, past Tibet. They're deep into some major Lebanese villages that total over hundreds of thousands of people that are going to want to come back. Whenever we get a full ceasefire, these are hundreds of thousands of Lebanese civilians that are going to go back to their villages. And Israel, they're just not going to be able to hold them. At the end of the day, if Israel wants to maintain a very small buffer zone at the border, maybe something like that's possible. But for this continuous ground invasion and occupation of major villages that we're seeing right now, I don't think they can withstand it to the election in October or November, whenever it is. So I would say that you're going to get an Israeli withdrawal out of the major villages within 6 months. We don't know when the strikes are going to be. I know that the Iranians are pushing hard for a complete ceasefire in Lebanon, not this BS where the Israelis get free roaming to where they can bomb places that they're threatened. That's not a ceasefire. A ceasefire is everybody behaves and are on good terms. Because we know from what we've seen from 2000 up till 2023, if Israel doesn't attack Lebanon, the resistance has shown that they're not going to attack Israel. Because, the resistance isn't built to do that. They're built to defend Lebanon and to help assist the Iranians and Palestinian cause. They're not there to invade Israel. That's just not going to happen. So I think the Iranians know that. I would assume the Americans know that. But the Israelis live in this fear of if anybody is strong around them, it's going to be the end of the world. So we could see a deal, because I know this is an Iranian red line. If we get a deal, President Trump knows that he cannot sabotage the entire deal over Lebanon, essentially. He's not going to throw the deal away and just restart war because Israel wants to continue bombing Lebanon. So I think we could get a minor ceasefire within 5 weeks. We could get the bombing fully stopped probably within 2 months and an Israeli withdrawal by the election this fall.
Let's see. Let's see. Now, you mentioned it. Let's talk about it, which is this alleged peace agreement. We did hear it's been a crazy 48 hours. 48 hours ago, we thought the war is going to restart. I was doing a show. We thought it's going to be any minute now. I went hours thinking it's going to be any minute. The next day, we hear there's going to be a peace deal. It's almost signed. The Israelis came out not happy about the deal. The monarchists came out. They weren't happy with the deal. And it seems like Trump is now retracting away from the deal. I'm hearing that there are two main reasons why the deal is about to fail. And the two reasons are, one of them is, and I think the one's minor and one's major. The minor one is that the Iranians are saying we want our assets to be unfrozen first before we do any of the other additional steps. The second one is what we've just been talking about, which is Lebanon. Lebanon, once again, was included in the deal. The conversation between the Trump administration and Iran was that there would be a complete ceasefire in Lebanon, as well as all fronts. Netanyahu once again got on the phone call with Trump, as did various others, Lindsey Graham, Randy Fine, you name them. And now it seems like we're hearing Trump is retracting from that deal. And now the conversation is about allowing Lebanon to be either part of the deal with the situation where Israel is able to bomb it whenever it wants, similar to what it was during 2024 to 2026, and similar to how it is in Gaza. What's your thoughts about the deal? And actually, let's deal with the first bit. What are your thoughts about the deal pertaining to Lebanon and the Israeli attempts to derail the entire deal?
Yes, so the Iranians are saying that the Lebanon ceasefire aspect of the deal is a red line and it has to happen. This was also included in the Pakistani ceasefire deal about a month ago now. So Israel just doesn't care. They don't listen. And they're not going to listen to the Iranians or the Pakistanis. It's going to come down to where Trump is going to have to call Netanyahu and he's going to have to tell him, stop. And I know some people don't believe that that can happen, but at the end of the day, if Trump calls Netanyahu and says, stop bombing Lebanon, and he's firm about it, and the deal is wrapped up, and Trump's legacy is on the line over this deal to end the war permanently, he's going to force the Israelis to stop bombing Lebanon. It's like I said earlier, the deal isn't going to be thrown away over Lebanon, which is a good thing for Lebanon. It's so unimportant to the Americans, the Lebanon is right now, so Trump doesn't really care. He looks at it like the Iranians is important, the Israelis is really important. From Trump's perspective, if Iran is going to sign the deal and they say, okay, Lebanon ceasefire or we're not signing, there's going to be a ceasefire in Lebanon. Trump's going to make that happen. Whether who has to talk to in Israel, who has to talk to within the Israeli army, it's going to happen. And the Iranians, if they're true to their word as they say, this is what's going to happen. So the Israelis are really pissed right now because they want free roam in Lebanon. This is the first time, 2024 was the first time, and since then was the first time the Israelis have had free bombing capabilities in Lebanon. They've been bombing it for 30 years now. And this is something they don't want to give up because they really like to bomb Lebanon. We've seen that pretty recently. They really love to bomb Lebanon. They love bombing Gaza, Iran, and Lebanon. That's their trifecta right now. So if Netanyahu has to walk out of this and withdraw the army and stop the bombing, that is a failure on him as a politician. He's going to lose his elections. He's going to look weak, which he already is right now within Israel. The newspapers are tearing him apart. He's not even a part of the deal. But for Trump, who's in charge of the deals right now, even though he's being influenced by some figures like Randy Fine, Lindsey Graham, Netanyahu, and all these animals, he's going to have to put his foot down. He's going to have to say, ceasefire in Lebanon or it's over. The only negative outcome, quite honestly, the only negative outcome for Lebanon would be if the Iranians throw them under the bus and if the Iranians say, we're going to take our deal, Lebanon, resistance, you're on your own. We're taking our deal, we're getting our peace deal, we're getting our sanctions, we're getting our assets back, but in exchange for that, we're just going to have to throw the resistance under the bus. That would be the worst scenario for Lebanon. Could it happen? I highly doubt it because Iran would never, ever again have the resistance in Lebanon fight with them. You're just going to lose that. So Trump is essentially
the world if he did that.
Oh, of course. You would lose, Iran would lose a lot. Because how would the resistance in Gaza, in Yemen, in Iraq, in groups in Syria, how would anybody want to do business with the Iranians again? Nobody would want to do business with them again if you get thrown under the bus like that. So honestly, as more as I talk about it and think about it that way, I think it's almost a guarantee. I don't want to say that, but it really is almost a guarantee that we're going to get at least a ceasefire. Talk about the withdrawal later, but at least a ceasefire within Lebanon as a part of the peace deal, because as I believe, everything essentially is agreed upon. They're just working on the wording of things regarding Hormuz, regarding the uranium. So if that's what is left to negotiate, I would assume that the Lebanon question is completely wrapped up, because it probably wasn't too hard for the Americans to concede that issue and just say, okay, if this is what it takes to talk about the uranium and the Strait of Hormuz, we'll tell the Israelis to stop. I think that's where we're at.
So just to be clear, we don't know the specifics about the Strait of Hormuz deal. I'm hearing there's alternative reports. Some are saying there's going to be a toll charged, others saying there's not. We're going to have to see what the situation is with that. Same with the nuclear enrichment. We're getting two different stories. By the way, guys, we were meant to have Professor Morandi straight after Ethan. That's been delayed till the same time tomorrow now. So same time tomorrow we'll have Professor Morandi on, and we'll find out more specifics about the deal. But the Strait of Hormuz we talked about, where they possibly, it does seem like there's some kind of parameters of an agreement. The nuclear enrichment, it seems like there's some kind of parameters of understanding, because that needs to be reached within 30 days. Where it seems like, and I'm just reading this right now as well, it's happening live, there does seem like the deal is falling apart, and is falling apart based on Lebanon, because the Israelis want to continue bombing Lebanon. Iran is adamant they don't want to betray Lebanon. So that's where we're at the moment. So it does seem like, I'm not saying it will, because obviously, as you know with deals, sometimes they look like they're about to fall apart. Sometimes they look like they're about to be agreed. At the moment, the deal is looking less likely because of Lebanon. Just that's kind of the news on that.
Yeah, because the Israelis at this point are starting to realize very quickly that the deal is materializing, and the deal is materializing. The deal is looking more and more likely, definitely as of last night. So what has happened over the past 24 hours is basically the Israelis called up Trump, kind of echoing what you said, and they said, look, we have to bomb Lebanon. We have to have this. You can't give up on us. You can't abandon us. We saw Twitter last night. The Israelis were losing their minds. Whatever the monarchists, the Iranian monarchists, whatever they have to say is irrelevant right now, because the Iran issue is just unnegotiable. There's not going to be a regime change. Hormuz and the uranium, that's going to be talked about. But this idea that the monarchists are going to get any win whatsoever, they've lost. But when it comes to the Israelis and Netanyahu, they have to have a victory, essentially. This was it. This was their 4-month war that they've been waiting forever to have, and they can't walk out of this with the Iranian regime still in place and having to withdraw from Lebanon. But, as I've said, if this is what's going to happen for a deal to be made, if Iran and America agree on it, honestly, that's just tough luck for the Israelis. They're going to have to withdraw and have a ceasefire. But they're doing everything they can right now to sabotage that. Everything they can right now to continue free bombing ability in Lebanon. And that's why I think that it has held up. I thought we could have had a deal last night, this morning, today. But as it goes on throughout today, it's 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on a Sunday, it looks like it's kind of being bogged down, stalled down. You probably have some tough spots to iron out over Hormuz and uranium, and the Israelis are not helping because they want to continuously bomb Lebanon. I would still say that we've drifted further from last night, but the idea of resuming war, in my opinion, this week is really far gone. I don't think we're going to get war this week, next week. I think that somebody conceded a position. It looks like the Americans conceded a position, and that's what's been holding us back since, January of 2026 on negotiations. Looks like Trump finally conceded a position. Do we know what that is now? No. We don't know what this deal will be. Maybe it looks bad for the Iranians. Maybe it's bad for the Israelis, Americans, Lebanese. Nobody really knows. A lot of this is speculation. But what we can kind of confirm at this point in time, just to simplify everything that we've been saying, the Americans want the uranium and the Hormuz issue answered. That's the most important. The Iranians want the uranium and Hormuz issue answered. That's the most important. That's what we've agreed upon. Every other detail has essentially been agreed that, okay, that's not important right now. And because these are the only two topics left, I feel like both sides are just going, we can figure something out. What do we have to fight over anymore? And as they're narrowing in on a peace deal, it was like, a 15-point plan? And now we're only negotiating two 2 points. That is a really good sign for peace. That it went from 15 points, Trump had a 20 point, the Iranians had a 10 point. We're down to somebody conceded on those other 8 points. Somebody gave in, and now we're back into the 2 final points. And given that this is became a revelation over the past 4 days, the Israelis have spent the past 3 days trying to derail it in every way possible. We see big names like Mark Levin, Laura Loomer, all over Twitter calling. It's like they're almost attacking Trump so that he reads this and he sees this, and Trump believes he's making the wrong decision, which in reality, for America, for Iran, the correct decision is peace, prosperity, and a mutual agreement that is good for both countries. And though we've had a war, it might not be as good as what Trump wanted, but at this point in time, we can have a real deal between the two, and that's why the Israelis have withheld it up today, and they're going to drive a wedge in it further and further, because they had their chance to have a regime change in Iran. They had it, they failed, and they don't want to wait another 20 years to have to try to do it all over again.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Israelis won't allow the deal to happen. All the people who put Trump in power are attacking him about this. But the question mark becomes, will there be a freeze? I think there will be a freeze because you got Muslim Hajj next week or this week. They're not going to attack at that time because there's loads of pilgrims in Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia won't allow the US to use its airspace because they make a lot of money from it. The other thing is you got the FIFA World Cup in the United States of America. And obviously, it's like a grandiose event, highly watched by everyone. It's like the pinnacle, and Trump's kind of got a trophy for it as well. So I think him engaging in kinetic warfare during that time is less likely. And then you have it where basically the summer period, it's not easy to do some kind of incursion into Iran if it's not bombing from the air during the summer period. So I think you may see a scenario where there is some kind of drift, but I don't think it's the end of this. I think even if there is some form of pause, it will continue. But Ethan, thank you so much for taking your time out to join us. Really appreciate you. Great conversation. Covered quite a lot. Where can people find you?
You can find me on X right here at EthanLevins2. You can click the link in my bio right there. You can find everything from there. I got a Telegram channel on Instagram. Click the link in my bio on my X at EthanLevins2. Find me everywhere. Had a great conversation. Felt like it was very informative on all levels. Always appreciate it, man.
Always appreciate you coming on. You're very informed on the issue. And Ethan does have a huge channel on Insta, so do check him out. Especially when he's sending... He's like the new... Ethan, you're like the white Habib now. You're like... Everyone's like... Ethan, send us the location. Send me location.
Yeah, at this point, it's...
I mean because you were given the location of the nuclear sites of the various places, right?
Yes, of course. And if war resumes, I will be quick on that. Maybe you'll even put out some in the Emirates or something. That would be a disaster. They would get so mad at that. But yes, we'll see. Hopefully no war. Hopefully we get peace. Screw the Israelis. Let's have a peace deal between America and Iran, and let's just go home and get this over with.
If you give a location in the Emirates, you're going to be the very first person coming on our show. I appreciate you coming on, Ethan. Thank you so much.
I'll see you. Nice talk to you as always.
Appreciate it. That was Ethan Levins. He is like the new Habib. He's the guy who went viral because he was sending the location of different Israeli military assets in Israel. And so he was sending the location. So that was the kind of joke that kind of failed. But it's probably my old age. The jokes just aren't working, are they? But anyway, much love to every single one of you. Make sure you like this video. Make sure you subscribe to this channel. Put your notifications on. And subscribe. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Did you agree with Ethan? He made a few controversial statements. He thinks the deal's going to be done. He thinks Trump's going to force Netanyahu. Do you agree with him? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like, comment, and subscribe. Just to let you know, Professor Morandi, it was meant to be now the interview. We've rearranged it for tomorrow. There was a slight mix-up from his side. So that interview is going to be tomorrow at 4 p.m. Eastern. So tomorrow, we've got a huge number of interviews. We've got Pepe Escobar, 11 a.m. Eastern. We have, let me give you all of them. We've got Pepe Escobar, 11 a.m. Eastern. We've got Simon Dixon, 3 p.m. Eastern. We've got Professor Morandi, 4 p.m. Eastern. We have Professor Gibbs, 8 p.m. Eastern. And then Daniel McAdams, 9 p.m. Eastern. Tonight, we've got Anthony Aguilera coming at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we've got the one and only Larry Johnson coming at 9 p.m. Eastern. So a packed lineup. The only way you're going to know we're going live is if you have your notifications on. So have your notifications on and be ready. We're going to be going back to the space, so you have to give me a few seconds to switch over because I wasn't expecting the switch over so soon. But yeah, on the YouTube, creatures on the YouTube, really do appreciate you guys. Really do appreciate the support you're giving. The channel has very blown up. Very blown up. I said that really badly, but has significantly blown up over the last couple of days. And I really appreciate all the support that you guys are giving in order to make sure that that's happened. So it's been really appreciative. So I'm just doing that now. Okay, cool. Okay, with the YouTube, with this channel, appreciate you guys joining in. Appreciate you guys listening. And for sure.